be such a damsel in distress.
They were all dead. Love kills. Did I love her? Was there a choice? The past is a gaping hole. You try to run from it. The more you run, the deeper, more terrible it grows behind you, its edges yawning at your heels. Your only chance is to turn around and face it.
We are at the sea. Repeat, we are at the sea.
But it's like looking down into the grave of your love.
Check the area. Hold your fire.
Or kissing the mouth of a gun, a bullet trembling in its dark nest, ready to blow your head off.
In 2001, Remedy Entertainment released a third-person shooter that combined the hard-boiled world of the noir detective and fused it with the gun-fu of John Woo cinema. At the time, it was a beautiful blend and also drew parallels to The Matrix because of the slow-motion mechanics that were implemented. It was a big hit for Remedy, putting them on the map of the gaming world. So much so that Rockstar would become their publisher for a following sequel 2 years later. This was a result of Take-Two Interactive acquiring the franchise, while still allowing Remedy Entertainment to develop the sequel. Remedy did all the legwork of building the product, and Rockstar and Take-Two would help with the budgeting needed for a bigger and more explosive successor. In terms of production quality, it was the equivalent of going from Terminator 1 to Terminator 2, from Alien to Aliens. In this case, we went from the dark, grimy underworld of New York to the continual downfall of Max Payne himself. In Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne. When it hit the stores in 2003, the game was another big success for Remedy. It received critical acclaim and pretty high review scores across many platforms. It used the same engine as the first one, the Havoc engine, while bringing a significant number of improvements across the board, from storytelling to gameplay, graphics and sound. It was a technical achievement for 2003, another great third-person shooter added to the collection. Max Payne 2's story begins 2 years after the events of the first game, where you had finally gotten your revenge for the death of your family. Like before, the beginning skips to a scene where we don't know what's going on, and Max Payne tells the new story in past tense. He returns to being a cop, like he used to be before joining the DEA. And from the looks of things, as you see throughout the game, it still seems like he hasn't moved on from the events of the first one, even so much so as having dreams and nightmares about the things he has lost. He receives a call about the sound of gunfire in a warehouse. Max intercepts the distress call, and from here, the descent to another rabbit hole of unanswered questions and conspiracies begin to unfold. We also see some returning characters from the first Max Payne. The thick accent of Vinnie Gognitti, the comedic but serious gangster Vladimir Lem, Jim Bravura, who has let Max Payne's revenge across New York slide, and finally, the central character to the story that drives Max's actions forward, Mona Sachs. Max Payne 2 carries the same narrative techniques as before, alongside the graphic novel style cutscenes as well as the ones you see in-game. James McCaffrey once again voices Max, with the same tone and dry humour. But the model this time isn't Sam Lake, instead it's based on another actor, Timothy Gibbs. Everyone else more or less has been changed somewhat, but this is a result of never seeing Mona or Vlad in-game from the first Max Payne, and 2 years later, 3D graphics had improved a great deal even then in 2003. There are some new characters as well added to the mix, but aside from Detective Winterson, every other new addition is more or less a part of the environment, so to speak. From when you're in the apartment complex encountering some of the neighbours, or when you're at the police station interacting with some of the officers. Max Payne 2's story feels more self-contained this time around, like a business disagreement you keep in a confined space, whereas in the first game, your actions impact the influence and reputation of a large corporation. Its story revolves around the complicated romance that develops between Mona and Max, where they had only met twice in Max Payne 1, and reunite in 2, where she becomes a more important character in the game's story. Their relationship doesn't feel forced, they're broken people that have seen too much, and never find the time to say what they really want to say to each other. Max's actions and decisions are influenced by her, even when it's against his better judgment. But with the cases of people going missing, and a cleanup crew of gunmen dressed as cleaners start targeting Max and Mona, they begin to find themselves in a spider's web, where secret societies and mobs collide, like planets becoming binary in space. I like the atmosphere and setting of Max Payne 1 more personally, but Max Payne 2's story with a romantic edge is better told and more compelling altogether. It does, however, become pretty predictable early on. giving you pretty damning clues as to who is responsible for the events transpiring. Max Payne 2's setting is based on rainy nights this time around, rather than the snow. You find yourself in familiar places somewhat, most notably the Ragnarok nightclub that's now being renovated into a restaurant by Vlad. You also have a ton of references from the first game, like the symbol of the Valkyr drug, Vinny's apartment flooded with Captain Baseball bat props, that makes him a laughingstock in the Mafia, and also the television segments showing Sam Lake himself as a hard-boiled detective, parodying the events of the first game. I like how Remedy was able to strike a balance between being serious when it was necessary, and then injecting humour, ranging from NPC conversations and in-game references. In the gameplay department, 2 is like 1 but on steroids. The bigger budget used to make the sequel really did wonders for the vast improvements presented here. You have a much bigger arsenal of weapons to use this time around, more refined animations and even physics that can be quite funny from time to time, and more. To put it simply, 2 is just a superior game to 1 when it comes to gameplay, but I will elaborate more on the matter. You have the same difficulty settings, including the New York Minute mode where you beat each level in the fastest time possible, making it essentially a speedrun mode. You also have Dead Men Walking. Basically, you kill as many enemies as possible before you get taken down, across 5 different maps. Difficulty-wise, Max Payne 2 is pretty fucking hard. Even on the easiest difficulty, enemies are very accurate and fast to respond to your presence. 90% of the time you will get hit by a fluke shot, especially when you're diving. The bullet time has been changed somewhat. You move in real time while everyone else is slow. As a result, you can blitz through rooms pretty quickly if you're quick enough. But even then, you will die pretty often, which is why quick saving will be really helpful here. When you slow-mo while your clip's empty, an animation plays out, showing either Max or Mona doing a 360. I'm not really sure what purpose it serves other than it was made to look cool. Again, the Max Payne series started around the time when films like The Matrix and its sequels were being copied by other films, so maybe it's a result of that. Aside from all the improvements made, it still pretty much plays the same. You heal using painkillers, you slow down time to control gunfights and roll to get away from grenade throws or to make yourself harder to hit. The enemies in Max Payne 2 are a lot smarter this time around. They'll take cover, throw explosives to flush you out, and rush you when they think they have you covered. And sometimes they'll stand by to ambush you when you go through room to room. It's not Fear 1's levels of AI smarts, but it's an upgrade from 2's predecessor. At some point, you do get to play as Mona Sachs herself. She basically controls the same as Max though, but with a bit more flexibility if you know what I mean. She also uses painkillers and has the slow-mo ability. Animations and physics are really satisfying here. You can send enemies flying, literally with explosives, or you can continuously fire at them. I love ragdoll physics. It just makes the playground more chaotic and fun in general, especially if you've spent a lot of time in Gary's Mod or any of the Source games made after Half-Life 2. In Max Payne 2, it makes you forget the serious tone it has when an enemy is doing cartwheels in the air. Your arsenal has quite a number of returning weapons like the 9mm, the Desert Eagle, the Ingram, grenades, Molotovs, the M4, the pump action, and the sawn-off. But you also have new additions to the family, like the Kalashnikov, the MP5, the Dragunov sniper rifle, and the automatic shotgun, the Striker. You can also dual-wield some of the weapons, and now you can also dual-wield the Desert Eagle, which is quite nice. All the weapons have been given a lot of detail, and are far easier to use than in the first game where the accuracy would sometimes be off, even when you were dead center. Throughout the whole game, the cleaners are the main enemies you fight. You do occasionally fight mobsters and eventually people in suits, but this time around the forces at hand are more consistent, and actually have an important role in the story itself. In terms of sound, weapons, explosions, movement, and slow-mo effects, they are crisp, like well-timed toast, having more of a punch and impact as you glide along. The main theme is a variation of the first game's theme, but when it comes to the soundtrack of Max Payne 2, I didn't find anything noteworthy about it personally. And at some point, I pretty much forgot that it was even there. Or when it did play, I would generally ignore it, focusing more on the gameplay. It didn't hook me in the way Max Payne 3's soundtrack did, but the main theme of Max Payne 2 is still just as good as the first one. As I had said, the graphics were one of the big improvements that Max Payne 2 brought to the table. For 2003, it looks incredible, and also animates quite nicely. It feels like a more polished game when you compare it to the original, which is why I play this one more than the first one when I just want to muck around and kill enemies. Max Payne 2 is another fantastic shooter added to the third-person shooter genre, and is by in most aspects a much better installment just about compared to the first game. It has vastly improved gameplay, graphics, a much better story, great references that pay homage to the first one, and more. The only genuine con that I can find is that the game is pretty short, going up to about 4.5 to 5 hours, depending on how much you progress through the game in one sitting. Max Payne 2 also has a dedicated modding community that have come up with some amazing content over the years. Elements of Style, which is basically the Kung Fu mod from 1, and the Evolution mod, which makes 2 play more like 3, and also adds a bunch of playable content that extends the playthrough of 2's overall campaign experience. The game was a huge step in the right direction, and marked the beginning of Remedy's knack for storytelling, which would blossom later on in titles like Alan Wake. If you want a fun but challenging third-person shooter with the polished 2000s feel, Max Payne 2 is worth checking out, especially if you loved the first game like I did. Thank you for watching.
Oh, no, you won't. Get out.